Morning, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Are you packed up, Tina?
I am not. I've started, but I haven't got everything done.
Yeah, I'm started.
Hey, what time do you think you should be here? We have to be packed and ready to go at 8:30.
So maybe like 7:40, 7:30, something like that.
Yeah, 7:40. It won't take long to throw our bags in the car.
Right.
And I think we're carrying way too much water. We didn't even drink it all last time, right?
No, we didn't. I didn't pay attention to anybody else's list, honestly.
Well, she has me bringing 2 cases and Sherry bringing a case. I'm like, I think that's way too much water. And it takes up so much room in the car.
Well, we're going to stop at Target. Why do we not just get a case while we're there? I mean,
You want me?
You know what I mean?
I haven't got the water. You think I should just wait and grab it when we get there?
Yeah, I would, because
That's how much we'll need.
yeah, because there's a couple of things I'm not going to haul, and I'm just going to pick up at the Target because there's no reason to haul that, you know?
Okay, that's what I'll do. I didn't want to take up that much room. I'm like, and I do remember us having to bring water back last time. So
Yeah.
and I think we only got 2 cases last time and didn't use it all.
Yeah.
Works for me. I'm ready to go though.
So I'm assuming somebody else was getting bread and like cheese, right?
Yeah, she had a good list going and everybody was on there. So
Yeah, I just waited on her. I told her, I said, send me my list. And then that's what I went.
Target we stopped at has everything, so we can get what we don't have while we're there. We need to. I'd rather get that kind of stuff there anyway than haul it all the way.
I agree.
How long did it take us to get to the ferry? Do you remember last time?
From Target?
No, from home.
You know, I don't remember. Jean was asking me that last night, and I said, I don't know. What was it in the car, about 5 hours, something like that?
That's what I was figuring, about 5 maybe. I don't pay attention.
I'm still trying to recover from the fact that Christy's going to be gone for a week. I'm trying to hold my emotional cries on the inside.
You can't handle being all by yourself for a whole week.
Well, I told Christy I'm not even going to shower for the week.
Get to do whatever Jean wants for a week.
Yeah. Well, guys, we got a lot to cover today. I just wanted to tell you guys that we got 2 more weeks. Here is the goal. This week we'll finish Demons, and then next week the next 2 weeks we'll cover this book right here. It's got 95 questions, and it's just a real good recap over a lot of stuff that we've covered. And it's not meant to be explanatory. It's meant to just remind you and to hear some answers. And you can't take notes the next couple of weeks because they're going to be way too many. But that's why this is being recorded. So I've published all the YouTube videos on defendtheword.com or Defend the Word YouTube channel. So now you can go back and review them. Obviously, they're not edited. They're just our classroom Zoom deal that, and maybe I'll keep doing it when we get back to church, just so people who can't see it, maybe they can, or be there for that Sunday or whatever, can can review it. But there is also one other thing. When we come back together after the summer break, Christy and I was talking about subject matter and what would you guys like to study, or does someone else want to bring something? We're kicking it around. Maybe at some point I can either start it when we come back, or I can start it after someone else brings. Sorry, someone's waiting 1 second. Carissa's joining. So like I said, when we come back after the summer break, we will. I'm going to teach on cults, and it's going to be. This is what it's going to look like. It's going to look like, what do Jehovah's Witnesses believe? Where does it scripturally fail? And how do you witness to them? And that's going to be how I do it for all of them. Because at the end of the day, I'm an evangelist at heart. I mean, after all, where does the word evangelist come from? It comes from the Greek word for the gospel. I can't even remember what it is, man. Agelion. Agelion is where you get the word evangelism from. So it comes, that's why they call it evangelicals. It comes from that word, gospel, and or the good news. And but anyway, so if someone wants to teach, just think about it for the next couple of weeks, because we got 2 more weeks of class. Like I said, we'll finish this today and finish the review over the next 2 weeks, and just let me know what you, let's see, which screen am I on? Oh yeah. Okay. So let's cut. Hold on 1 second, guys. I gotta get my video, get my face off of here. There we go. If you cannot see my screen, just let me know, because this is, you should not be seeing the presenter screen. You should be seeing your screen, the slide screen. So I swapped them for my laptop so it would be bigger for me to read. But anyway, let's get started. This is where we left off last week. And so the next question, very next question was, in the Old Testament, Satan refers to, and let me do a poll question. Let's see. So give this about 30 seconds. Whoever wants to vote. Okay, so it looks like almost everybody chose adversary, and 17% chose a rebellious spiritual being. So the answer is actually the adversary. And the title Satan was shared by many in the Second Temple writings. The title Satan, as we think of him, was developed over centuries. Now, he was a rebellious spiritual being, so that is correct. Satan is a rebellious spiritual being. That is a correct answer, but the word Satan actually refers to the meaning of the word adversary. The most familiar evil spiritual figure in the Bible in the biblical underworld is the serpent of Eden. Now, I pulled the next few slides. We'll go through them quickly. They're from something that I already taught in class, but I thought I would remind you again about the word Nakash, serpent of Eden, before we scroll through these. Beginning in the Second Temple period, Satan started to be taken as Satan started to be referred more to as a person. But in the Old Testament, it was the Satan, the adversary. And the adversary could actually be good or bad. It didn't have to be demonic, or it didn't have to be the devil as we know him. Nowhere in the Old Testament is the serpent ever called Satan. Now, it is clear that the serpent is Satan through Second Temple period writings and also the New Testament, but the Old Testament doesn't connect those two things. So when you look at the New Testament, they connect serpent of the Old Testament with Satan. Where did they get that? They don't get it from the Old Testament. They get it from the intertestamental books that's in between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So whenever you're reading the Bible, it's a good thing to remember. If you're reading the Bible and you find that you can't find whatever looks, like you can't find something in the Old Testament that's you just got through reading in the New Testament, and you can't figure out how the Old Testament relates to the New Testament, like it says, see there, it's probably not relating to it at all. It's probably relating to the period in between the Second Temple period. So a lot of Christians tend to dismiss all of that because they want to stick with just the 66 books of the Bible, which is artificially too stringent to be able to read Scripture, because the New Testament writers did not just stick to those 66 books. And that wasn't their worldview. Their worldview wasn't only those 66 books. So anyway. So this is not the subject matter of this portion of the class, but like I said, let's just quickly mention this again. If you want to know more information about this, Inspiring Philosophy and Michael Heiser has some great YouTube videos that go in more detail about this, but I'm just going to fly through these. Now, the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field that the Lord God had made. It's important that you read this and don't read into it. It doesn't say that the serpent is a beast of the field. It says it's more crafty than any beast of the field. So some modern translations add the word other to imply it was like the serpent was one of many beasts of the field. It'll say the other. For instance, the ESV here says, now the serpent was more crafty than any other wild animal or beast of the field, which Yahweh had. This is actually, but anyway, I took a screenshot of my Logos Bible software, and you'll see plainly, I highlighted in yellow, the word other is not in there. It's implied. You have to have a theological leaning when you read this and translate this to put the word other in there. It's not actually a Hebrew word. So when it says other, and by the way, someone asked me recently, they said, Gene, how do you look at translations? How do you read them? I said, I read all translations like if they're commentaries, because every one of them to a degree is a commentary. They're all choosing what words they want to use and how they want to best describe a certain thing. For instance, it doesn't have the word other, but you'll see it in a lot of translations, but the word is actually not even in the Greek. In the Hebrew, which you can plainly see, it's missing. So as a reminder from a few months ago, vowels are not in the original Hebrew text. Vowel points and cantillation marks A cantillation mark is what we would call an accent mark on the top of the letters, were added to the text around the 7th to the 10th century AD. So 7th to 10th century AD. Until then, all it was consonants. That's very important that you remember that, because depending on which consonants you choose for this word, it actually changes the meaning of the word altogether. So this word Nakash, depending on which consonants they wanted to use in the 7th to 10th century AD, translated it as this. So, and you have serpent and diviner, which is another word for a deceiver, and a shining one. So as a reminder, from previous slides, previous months ago slides, the Egyptian symbol, the Egyptian word is thought to be related to the Hebrew word Nakash, and the reason there's a particular reason for that. Well, don't forget, an Egyptian wrote Genesis. An Egyptian did. He was also, he didn't actually become like Hebrew until, when did he decide to be Hebrew? When he was like 40, 45? That was when he actually started standing up for his Hebrew roots. But up until then, he was actually trained and learned all the Egyptian ways. So a lot of the things that he would relate to the people who were in Egypt as slaves, who were very aware of Egyptian ways, he would use words that would relate to them. So they would be able to relate from not only a Hebrew way, but an Egyptian way. So it's not hard to understand that Egyptian things and Hebrew things blend. I guess it's easy to forget, and you think that it's just a bunch of Hebrews running around and had no other influences, but that's not the case. So on here you see a seraph, seraph like the seraphim and cherubim. It's a seraph is also another word for snake. So you have a triple entendre that we just saw, the word Nakash, and that is, that has three meanings. For serpent's one of them. But it's funny that the word seraph that we think of as a seraphim, like Satan was a seraphim, but they're also throne guardians. In the Old Testament, a lot of people may not know this, but the word seraph is more often translated the word snake in Scripture than it is an angelic being. So it is possible and very plausible that a seraph and a snake resembled one another, like that winged serpent being in the Old Testament. That serpent that's mentioned in the Old Testament, that is also referred to as a seraph, because we know Satan was a seraphim, was one of the seraphim, a throne guardian, through Scripture, that there is no reason to believe that those two don't reflect each other. Snakes were also used as signs of divinity in the ancient Near East. So, and remember, divinity isn't only implied to God, not in this text, not in this context. Well, even I showed last week that demons in the New Testament, the word demon, daimonion, is actually translated in our text as divinities, because it's not divinity. We have taken the word divinity and only stuck it to the name God, which is not, God's not even a name. God is a description. Yahweh is his name. So let me read this slide right quick. There is now an emerging consensus that the Egyptian Uraeus serpent is the original source of the seraphim motif. So as a, just let me read these slides, and this may look hokey and may look funny, but you see these snakes, but these are actually Jewish things, because we have a view of a snake in our culture, but when when we have a view of snakes in our culture, of serpent snakes in the Old Testament, but that is not the view that they had. And so when Moses put a snake on the shaft and lifted it up, it didn't mean to them what it meant to us. So anyway, so I'll just read these. Seal 273 portrays Yahweh symbolically as a sun disk wearing a crown, a typical representation in Israelite Judean art. Yahweh is thus portrayed as king and surrounding him with seraphs. Notice that the seraphs look like snakes. Why? Because, and remember, the word seraph is more often translated in Old Testament, Hebrew Old Testament, as snake than it is as a winged being. So there's a lot lost when you start changing things from one language to another, one culture to another. Yahweh is portrayed as a king, and surrounding him are the seraphs. Seal 274a may portray Yahweh as king sitting on some sort of structure or throne, also attended by a seraph. This time the seraph has wings. The seals picture basically the same scene portrayed by Isaiah in the opening verses of Isaiah 6, 1-7. The text on seal 273 states that it belonged to the courtier of King Ahaz, named Ashena. In light of the similarity between the seal of Isaiah 6, it is noteworthy that Jerusalem in the 8th century BC was a very small town, that both Isaiah and Ashna lived during the reign of King Ahaz, and that Isaiah enjoyed very close connection to the royal court, which Ahaz served. It is inconceivable that Isaiah and Ishna did not know each other. So, given the iconography and the syntax of the Hebraic words, the most likely explanation of Isaiah's vision had winged serpentine spiritual beings praising God. So it is not a hard leap to believe the serpent in Genesis 3 was not talking about a snake, but instead talking about a serpentine being. So anyway, as a reminder, since we were talking about serpent, I thought you would need to recap that because it is so important. Now, moving on. So this is a picture from the Lord of the Flies. It's creepy. I get it. I chose it because it is creepy. But there's a reason why I chose the Lord of the Flies. The name Baal-zebub, not Beelzebub in the New Testament, but Baal-zebub, occurs only 4 times in the Old Testament, in 2 Kings chapter 1, verses 2, 3, 6, and 16. In 2 Kings 1, an accident of Hazael, the king of Israel, and his consulting the oracle of the god of Baal-zebub of Ekron is described. For etymological reasons, Baal or Baal-zebub must be considered. You have to take into consideration that it was a Semitic god. He is taken over by the Philistine Ekronites and incorporated into their local cult. Zebub can be a collective noun for, wait for it, flies. So if you look at the Akkadian or the post-biblical Hebrew or the Jewish Aramaic or the Syriac or other Semitic languages, you can plainly see that Zebub is used as flies often. So Baal-zebub could be Lord Flies, Lord of the Flies. That's how you get Lord of the Flies. That's why you see sometimes the devil will have, in some places, in some movies or some writings, he's referred to as Lord of Flies. It comes from the Old Testament, Baal-zebub. Now, it's not all, we're not done yet. It's not that simple. So in the Ugaritic text, we sometimes find Zebub-Baal or Prince Baal, but in other cases, we find the proper name Baal-zebub. But in the New Testament, Baal is changed to Baal or Bel, so it's an equivalent to the name Baal. So the phrase Baal-zebub would have been well known in Semitic world as meaning Prince Baal or ruler Baal. So Beelzebub is therefore best understood in the Greek translator is a Greek translation of the 2 Kings Baal-zebub. And one of the things that is important to remember is when you're looking at Beelzebub or Baal-zebub, it's attributing such a title to the original rebel of Eden, cast to earth, and the underworld after his deception led to the loss of immortality for humanity. It makes good sense as Baal was a ruler of the gods, the earth, and the underworld in this ancient Semitic religion. So when you see Beelzebub, you can't actually even understand the term fully of Beelzebub without understanding Baal-zebub in the Old Testament, 2 Kings Old Testament, and you don't even really fully get the full flavor of that word unless you start looking into ancient Near Eastern writings. What did they say about that? Where did that word come from? How did that word come about? So anyway, I just think it's what we're doing is going over. We're talking about Satan on this question, just in case you remember who is Satan. So since we're talking about Satan, I thought I would throw out some stuff that was actually that you may not know about Satan, because you have a view of Satan, and I'm about to shake that view up yet again, and this is here. So this doesn't make this true, what I posted here, but this does make but it is extremely important, because the Second Temple understanding of Satan was that there was not one, but many. So when the New Testament says Satan was the snake or the serpent in Eden, that is correct. The adversary, Satan, but in the Second Temple period, that guy was not the chief of that serpent, that rebellious person was not the same one that did other things. They had a broader view. Everything wasn't blamed on one bad spiritual being. There was multiple bad spiritual beings. And particularly the one, Gadriel, number 6 here, was the name of the specific Satan that influenced Eve, according to Second Temple writings. Now, I'm not saying this is true, but I am saying our first century Christian writers who wrote the Bible were quite aware of this stuff, especially since Peter and Jude quoted directly from this particular passage. I mean, this particular book. So they were aware of it. Earlier, I gave a list of evil spiritual beings. You know, that list, I said in one of the questions, there were over 15, and I just gave a list of them. That was last week's class. Well, one of them was Belial. Now, it's really cool because Belial is found in parallel with Mastema. Now, Mastema and Belial are the same spiritual being. Like when you could see that in Second Temple thinking, Belial and Mastema are the same being. Now, why does that matter? Well, Belial is mentioned in the New Testament as saying, as directly comparing Belial to Christ. Belial is the number one name in Second Temple writings for the name of the Satan how we would think Satan. That is the most common name they would give him. Even though it's only mentioned once in the New Testament, it's mentioned more times than any other name to describe that Satan in Second Temple period. And his other name is Mastema. Now, why is that important? Well, in Jubilee chapter 10, verse 8, Mastema, Belial, is also known as the chief of the demons. But we'll learn more about Mastema and this in question 12. Now, let's talk about this slide just for a second. This isn't in our Bible. This is considered an Orthodox book in, a proto-canonical book for the Orthodox and Roman Catholics. You see these blue marks? Well, those blue marks they consider it deuterocanonical, second canon. You can be read in church, but they're not going to make major doctrines off of it. But the Orthodox and Roman Catholics will. We totally dismiss it. Now, I'm not here to argue whether the book should be in the Bible or not. That's not the point. But I am telling you that the oldest Bible that we have, it has this book in it. It's just a fact. And why am I even talking about this book? Well, the Old Testament word Satan is always translated as diablos. I'm sorry, not diablos, diabolos. Diablos is like a Mexican word for devil. Diabolos, except once in the book of Sirach. Now, here the Hebrew word Satan is translated to the Greek word satans. So this is a 2nd century BC book. And this is when the name Satan in the Old Testament starts becoming translated. Instead of diabolos, it starts being translated as Satanas. Because if you look at the Greek word Satan in the New Testament, Satan's always translated as Satanas. So there you can see where all of a sudden they start switching it. And you ask, why do they switch it? Well, in the Old Testament, remember in the Old Testament that they use the words based on the meaning, not like we do. We use like Satan as a title. They would use Satan as, what did he do? An adversary or an angel. They didn't call all spiritual beings angels. What did they do? They called them by what they did. An angel, if a spiritual being was given a message, a malak, they would call him a messenger. But through the Second Temple period, they started changing some things, the way they referred to things, where they started making words where it would be like the Satan or the messenger or the malak, the angel. They would actually start applying certain words directly to certain beings as a name. And that's when you do that, it's called making it into a technical word. You're changing the meaning of the word to mean something very specific. So like when we say Satan, we know what we mean. Even though the word has a meaning, the adversary, we don't mean generic adversary. We mean the adversary, So as a side note, the Greek word diabolos did not influence directly Diablo. just because I mentioned Diablo on accident earlier. It actually comes from the Latin version, Diabolus. It's actually a Diabolus or Diabolos. It sounds like the same, but it's actually spelled Dibollus instead of Los like the Greek. So the Greek influenced the Latin. Then the Latin influenced the Spanish Diablo and also the English word devil. Now, it didn't come directly to devil. There was many steps to devil. You have to look at Old English word for devil. It's like defolo or something, and then it changed over centuries to modern English, which is the word devil. Anyway, hope you're learning something. So the next question. Who rules the world? Now, let me find that polling question and let me launch it. So I just 66% of the classes has voted. I was just waiting. Okay, now 83% of the class. All right, so we'll close the polling. All right, so it looks like 40% said God, 20% said Satan, and 40% said all the above. So the answer is all the above. Now, we covered this discussion previously in our discussion last week of question 2, the God of the nations, as it pertains. So if you want more details about this, I don't know if you remember when I said question 2 is going to refer to a few other questions, all the above. I covered this in detail in question 2. So just review back to last week's on YouTube. And you can fast forward it to question 2 and all the stuff we talk about, and you'll see what this says. So that way I don't rehash everything that we just did. Okay, so according to the Bible, when are the devil and his angels cast out of heaven? Oh, sorry, I'm reading it and forgot to launch it. I got to be smarter than the software. Okay, it looks like everybody who's going to join. Okay, so we got 60% before creation, 20% shortly after creation, 20% at Christ's resurrection and ascension. Nobody said after Christ's return. So the actual answer is at Christ's resurrection and ascension. So this is going to take me for a minute because I need to cover, just be patient with me, and Jan, just be patient. I'm going to cover your 1260 questions you asked a while back. I told you I would, and I am. So this is a never-ending subject. We're not going to spend much time on eschatology. The eschatology is a fancy word for end times, the study of end times. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that. I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to go through this fairly rapidly, and because there are so many views, and we could be here forever. And I really don't even care if my view of end times is correct or not, because end times is going to happen exactly like it's going to happen, and I'm supposed to be prepared every day as though Christ is returning, and supposed to witness to people about the love of Christ as though if he's returning today. So there's a reason why this is my least favorite subject, eschatology. Some people love it. And do you know what's really ironic? Let me tell you what's ironic. The pre-trib, pre-millennial, pre-trib group, like the Left Behind people, who say they're going to be pulled out before a lot of the stuff in Revelation is fulfilled. Actually, most everything. They are the ones they are the group that always look at all the prophetic stuff more than anybody else, who thinks that all the other views think they're going to go through some or all of it, but the pre-trib says no, none of it. But yet they're the ones who always study and put this out there. I just think that's sort of ironic. I'm just saying. All right. So as a reminder, this is an excellent example of how a Christian tradition can become doctrine. There isn't a single verse in the entire scripture that tells us, A, the original rebel sinned before the episode of Genesis 3, or B, a third of the angels fell either before humanity or at the time of the fall in the garden. There's only one passage in the whole Bible that mentions a third of the angels and Satan / the serpent in tandem. Now, that's in Revelations 12, 1-9. This view of a third of the angels rebelling before creation comes from two sources. The second source, the 19th century source, that's trying to use this view to justify a particular view of Genesis called the gap theory. I'm not going to go over what the gap theory is either, because it's not important. That view of the 19th century view comes from a 17th century view. So they're really from the same source. And the 17th century view is this guy here, John Milton, and his poem that was written in the 17th century. Up until then, the church has never even discussed it. So like this guy made a poem and it creeped into the church as though it was some kind of doctrine. Most Christians don't realize that.
Jay,
So,
can I say something?
Sure.
Jesus said he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven while he was in his earthly ministry. So how could it be that the fall is coming whenever it was that you said it was coming?
Okay.
The fall, him being cast out of heaven. I didn't mean the fall like we usually think of the fall. Sorry.
Right. So you may be assuming that Jesus mentioned that as though he was in heaven watching Satan.
He said, I'll just read it. It's Luke 10:18. He said, so he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven.
Yep. We're going to cover it.
Okay. Sorry.
That's okay. No, this is not a lecture. It sounds like a lecture most of the time, but it's actually a Bible study class. So, but I am actually going to cover that. You'll at least see another point of view. It doesn't make it right, it just makes it different. All right. Now let's get back into this. Let's see, where was that? Okay, so the birth of Messiah is clearly in view in Revelations 12:5. It points readers to messianic theme of Psalms 2:8-9. Okay, so if you look, verse 8, ask me and I will make the nations your heritage. I'm quoting verse 8 in Psalms 2. So, and don't worry, I'm building up to all of this and you'll see how I'm thinking. So Psalms 2, okay, so Revelations 12 is quoting Psalms 2. And it's referring to that. So in Psalms 2, you look at verse 8, it says, let's just read 8 and 9. Ask of me, and I will make the nations your heritage, and the ends of the earth your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron and dash them into pieces like a potter's vessel. The reference to a child born to the child born to rule the nations as being caught up to God, to his throne in Revelation 12 is an explicit reference to the resurrection and ascension, the key events that result in the defeat of Satan and the inauguration of the kingdom of God on earth. I'm not the only person who thinks this. There's scores of scholars that recognize this, but one I have noted here, Beeley, he says, the destiny of Christ's child is described in an allusion, talking about Psalms chapter 2, which prophesies that God's Son will defeat all worldly enemies and then be enthroned as ruler over the earth. In fact, Christ is referred to as a male son to show that he is the initial fulfillment of Psalms 2, which is the decisive event for the successful growth of the church. The last clause referring to Christ's ascent implies that Psalms 2, 7 through 9 prophecy about God's messianic son has begun to be fulfilled. In context, this initial fulfillment means that as in ancient times, so again the dragon has been defeated. This time, the defeat has occurred through the resurrection and ascension of Christ. So the first Advent context continues into Revelations 12, 13 through 17, which I'm going to read this real quick. Revelations 12, 13 through 17. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the two wings of the great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into wilderness to place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after woman to sweep away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take here in a second. We're going to just look at some of those verses. And so the wording of verse 17, it is clear association with the vision that comes from as Jesus as the early citation of Psalms 2. The dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring. So this simply cannot be construed as describing a primeval rebellion prior to the creation of humanity in Eden. So it can't be construed that way to happen before, since there is no other passage in the Bible that there's a third language in conjunction with this satanic conflict. The idea that Satan and 1/3 of the angels rebelled at this time is, in my opinion, and so many others, just a traditional myth that started in the 17th century with John Milton. So this myth is often defended by means of the so-called gap theory, this belief that Satan rebelled between Genesis 1 and 2. The most exhaustive scholarly refutation of the gap theory, if you want to know, is Weston Fields. So he has uninformed and unfulfilled, a critique of the gap theory, if you want to read more about that. First, there is no definite article on the preposition Beth, which is Beret Sit, which suggests that one does not describe the beginning. So, by the way, sorry, what I was doing was giving a defense against gap theory right here. Let me just skip this for the second time. I was going to say, first, there's no definite article. And second, the most damaging to the gap theory approach, Genesis 1:2 begins with a disjunctive wall. I got a lot of stuff here, but I don't. And lastly, the gap theory notion that Toba Wahu, formless and empty, speak of a judgment upon evil, particularly since darkness is a circumstance. I could spend a lot of time going through the gap theory. I have a lot of stuff here. I decided just now, not going to do it. Not going to go through there. Revelations 12 is about a past event. Now, what I told you was we're going to go through the verses, and I promise you we will, and you'll see it here in a second. It's about a past event. In other words, Revelation 12 predicts nothing. It is about past, not future. This chapter is not about the future, in my opinion. This does not mean everything in Revelation is preterist. If you don't know what preterist is, that means that all things are in the past in Revelation. It's not true. Some verses could be a look back and others could be prophecy. I am not a preterist. Not that preterist is heretical, but I'm not a preterist by any stretch of the means. All right. I know this is a busy slide. You can read everything, or you can just concentrate on the yellow, and I did that for your convenience. So Revelation 5, that is a quotation right out of Psalms. It is messianic of Psalms 2. Her child was caught up. It is a reference to the resurrection, and more specifically, the ascension, where Christ ascended. Revelation 6, and the woman fled to the wilderness. And you say, well, who's the woman? Is it Mary? If I'm saying this is the child? No, I'm not saying it's Mary. What I'm saying is this is Israel. The woman is Israel. Israel births the Messiah. Israel is the bride of God in the Old Testament. Israel is the one who would produce the messianic child. He is a descendant of Abraham. Give me a moment, Jan. I'll circle back around to 1260. Promise. So, verse 10, this happens after I would say, or I would say even more pointedly, in conjunction with the inauguration of the kingdom. So when Jesus rises from the dead and has victory over the powers of darkness and sits down at the right hand of God, that basically begins the end of the dragon and those who are with him. That's what Revelation 12:7 and onward are describing. This is not describing a primeval rebellion of a third of angels before the creation of humankind. This is nothing of the sort in this passage. By the way, this is the only place in the Bible, again, that the 30 angels are mentioned. The idea of a primeval rebellion in angels before creation, or in generation, or in between Genesis 1 and chapter 1, verse 1, and chapter 1, verse 2, is a myth. It has no scriptural basis. You can prove that and establish it, I think, pretty easily just with a concordance. So the dragon gets thrown down, and John says in verse 10, I didn't have John 10 up here. I'm just going to read it. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of God and the authority of his Christ has come. So verse 10 validates the explanation I'm giving to you. It does, so you just have to go read John, see what John said. So what's happening here is from verse 7 on. Right now I'm at the end of verse 14. You have the flight of the woman under persecution, which was verse 6, repeated with more detail in verse 7 through 14. It's the same episode. It's like verse 6 is an earthly reference because the birth happens on earth, and then Israel has to flee under persecution. Verses 7 through 14 are sort of the perspective from heaven. There's a war in heaven in conjunction with the events of the Messiah because he is coming, resurrection and ascension, bringing forth the kingdom. You have something alluded to in Luke 10:18. In Luke 10:18, and he said to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. I've said it in the past that this is in conjunction because it is just read the Gospels with the beginning of his preaching about the kingdom of God. So what Jesus is saying in Luke 10, in my opinion, is that the kingdom of God is sorry, my mouth is dry, commensurated with the defeat of Satan. Satan no longer can accuse believers. He no longer has claim on their souls, as it says here in Revelation 12. The accuser does not have the case anymore. Revelation 10b, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night. I believe all these things were happening all with the birth. There was like this big, huge war, and it's not necessarily just linear with time, because heaven doesn't necessarily work exactly with our time. So you have Jesus's birth, his death, resurrection, and ascension in different stages of this war happened at different things at different times. This is my opinion. But anyway, the devil has no authority anymore. So what Jesus comments on when he begins preaching about the kingdom it foreshadows what is going to happen. When does it happen? Here's the key point. When does all this happen? When Christ ascends and takes his seat at the right hand of God throughout the New Testament. That is when the kingdom begins. It's not when the kingdom reaches its fulfillment or fullest form. It's when the kingdom begins. The kingdom is here. It is. If it's not here, then Christ is ruling over nothing, and he isn't ruling at all. The New Testament has him ruling in many places. So you either accept the language of the New Testament or you don't. You make something up in its place, and that's pretty much what I think that some people do. It's just what I think. So Israel gets persecuted in this portion, and if we keep reading here, we see that it actually expands. The serpent poured water out like a river out of the mouth of the woman, sweeps her away with a flood. It's imagery, in my opinion, about trying to kill the woman, Israel, devour Israel, drown Israel, or whatever. Remember, now, going back, let's see. Sorry. That's an interesting line. Who are the rest of her offspring? Who are the rest of Israel's offspring? On those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. It's also a reference to the church. The church begins with Jewish converts. This is New Testament History 101. Revelation 12 is chronologized, putting stuff in order. I need water. That stuff had happened and stuff that's going to happen in their day. So, in my opinion, it's, some things were happening, and some things that they were mentioned would be prophetic. Thank you. My wife has brought me some water, so my tongue can quit sticking and I can actually pronounce words. Now, I apologize for taking you through this long eschatology thing, but I don't think, when I tried to answer the 1260, I wanted to tell you how I think about the whole thing, and I had to think and really study it. So you say, Miss Jan, what about the 1260 days? So here we go. A quote from David Owen, he in his Revelation commentary, I think he sums it up nicely. By the way, he is a emeritus Walter Professor of New Testament and Christian Origins at the University of Notre Dame. He quotes several sources for this, but I'm only going to quote this one. In the present context, it is relevant that almost exactly 3.5 years elapsed between the beginning of the first Jewish revolt in AD 66 and the siege and destruction in AD 70. So it was almost exactly 1,260 days from when the time the Jews started to the time the temple, the second temple was destroyed when they had their first revolt. Now, keep in mind, the Jewish calendar has 1,260 days. I taught that before. I'm not going to justify that. I just throw it out there. The Jewish calendar had 1,260 days per year instead of 365. If you divide 360 by 1260, 360 days is their calendar year. 1,260 days is what we're discussing. It comes up to 3.5 years exactly. If you use our calendar, it's a little off. If you use their calendar, so anyway, so there you have what I think. The Jewish the 1,260 days refers to the Jews under persecution. It lasts for 3.5 years, and then they got destroyed, and then they got dispersed, and then Rome tried to destroy the Jews, and she was running, which was the mother running for her life, and tried to be swallowed up. And there was also a spiritual war happening at the same time. So there was a spiritual war that happened at the ascension. All of this is all happening around the same time, in my opinion. Now, this doesn't make me a preterist. I'm not a post-millennialist, where I just believe that this part of Revelation refers to 1,260 days. I don't think it's a coincidence that it was 1,260 days from the time the Jews started their revolt to the time the temple was destroyed. I don't think that was I don't think it's a coincidence. So the escape of the people of God is not. Hold on a second. There's a verse here. It says, I have written, says, what about verse 11? And they, which referring to the believers, have conquered him, which is the dragon, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they loved not their lives even unto death. Now, some people say, well, that if it was really about the destruction of Jerusalem, and the Christians and who believed, and everybody was running for their life because the Jerusalem being ransacked and destroyed, that doesn't sound like much conquering. Well, in my opinion, the escape of people of God is not earthly. It's ultimately heaven. They escaped because the accuser of the brethren had been cast down. They no longer were subject to go to Hades. Now they could go to heaven because of the finished work of Christ on the cross. They have eternal life. That's their escape. So Revelation 12 to me does not say that no one died. Lots of people died. And that's what played out in history. This is a historical reckoning. Revelation 12 is a historical reckoning. When people say they believe that Revelation was written before 70 AD because the destruction of Jerusalem was not mentioned, well, I don't believe that. I believe it's mentioned right here. It's not a history book. It's a revelation of Jesus Christ. But I believe that they were recapping what was happening in a symbolic way, like in a lot of symbolism, because the whole book is cryptic that way. I would like to add that you're going to have people in the audience say, again, this is preterism. This actually doesn't say a thing about preterism in principle, because Revelation 12 doesn't predict anything. It doesn't really comment on the rest of preterist system. You can still have Revelation 12 look back at an event. It looks back at the Messiah's birth, after all. You can have Revelation 12 looking back in time, but that does not mean that it legitimizes a system of preterism. That would be an overreading of 12, in my opinion. Anyway, I know I said a lot. There's no way you can remember all of that. That's why it's recorded. And you can go review it as many times as you'd like. And you can argue with me, and then I'll tell you you're right. And then we'll talk about something else, probably something more important like lunch. In the Old Testament, Yahweh is the God of all the nations. True or false? I can't reach out and slap anybody. You got to wake up. I know I said a lot. I had to say a lot. I got a lot to cover, and unfortunately, I had to cut last week short. I'm not unfortunate. It's really not unfortunate that I had to cut last week short for premarital counseling. So 83% said false, 17% said true. We're not going to cover anything here. We covered this in question 2. This is one of the ones that I referenced. The Old Testament, Yahweh is the God of the nations. We covered a lot in verse 2, question 2, so refer back to last week's question 2. Now, let me find a polling question that reflects this. Territorial gods. Territorial gods do not exist. True or false? So 100% of the class said false. And that is true. I mean, that's funny. False is a true answer. False is the correct answer. We're not going to talk anything about this because we covered this one in question 2. Those are the 3 questions that I said. Remember this because I'll refer back to these in these questions. Well, refer to last week's question 2 for more details. Now, let's get into something equally fun. Let's see. Demons. Demons are technically, what are demons? All right, so we got 83% of the class voted. For the sake of time, stop it. 40% says rebellious or fallen angels. 60% says spirits of the dead Nephilim. Now, spirits of the dead Nephilim is the correct answer. Obviously, I got more to say than just that. So it is important to remember, I'm not arguing for this to be added to the canon. These 2 books are great together, by the way. So if you want to read Enoch, it would helps tremendously to have the Book of Enoch, the companion to it. The reason why is because he starts mentioning things you can't know about, because that is his field. He says, hey, by the way, this part of Enoch is actually referencing this in the ancient Near Eastern or Mesopotamian or the Ugaritic text or something. He attaches all that. So it's really 2 things to go. You really want them together. And this is a really great book that will actually help tremendously as well in this subject matter. But anyway, so you'll see I got an excerpt here from the Book of Enoch. The birth of the giants is explored in terms of the mingling of the spirits of the flesh. Angels properly dwell in heaven, and humans properly dwell on the earth, and so forth. You can read. The giants of the Watcher tradition are described as spiritual beings that were born with a human-type body in Enoch 15:4, 8, 16:1. The giants are seen as categorically evil because they are illegitimately mixed nature of human and angel, as you see in 1 Enoch 15. Their function in the physical world of 1 Enoch was to destroy humanity. Following their death, their purpose as evil spirits was to tempt humans and to draw them away. The Old Testament, by the way, doesn't tell us what these are, what demons are. It doesn't. And this word, this word demon, whether it be Hebrew or Greek, are pretty ambiguous. So when you say look at the New Testament, it talks about the spiritual being, the spirit. It doesn't tell us, hey, this is what a demon is. If you notice something that's missing, one of the things that's missing is when they say, hey, these guys are possessed by demons. Well, they're it just assume the writer assumes the reader has the backdrop on where demons come from and what they are. But the Old Testament doesn't give us any clue about what demons are and where they come from. It doesn't tell us. The New Testament doesn't tell us. But in the Second Temple writings, they explore that idea. So the New Testament writers, understanding what the common view of demons is at that time, didn't have to describe it again. So anyway, so there's an example in Jubilees where demons fathered by the Watchers, so in the book of Jubilees and the book of Enoch are treated the exact same way, whether they're canon or not, by all the traditions. So Jubilee is a retelling of Genesis. It has a lot, it's not like the year of Jubilee. So it has nothing to do with that. As we saw earlier in our study, demons, the spirit of the giants, they operate under divine permission and therefore exist as contained powers. Now, Mastema, we'll cover this in a little bit, but Mastema, according to Second Temple period writings, went to God and said, hey, can I have a tenth of these demons to torture these humans who were rebellious? And God said yes. So 90% of the demons went to hell and locked up. 10% are under the control of the chief of the demons, Mastema, who is also known as Belial, the most common name for Satan in the Second Temple period. So, I don't know. If you think this is a weird view, maybe our view, maybe your view is very Christianized, very Westernized, because I'm just telling you what was kicking around at the time the Jews were around at that time, how they were thinking. I'm not in how do we know what they're thinking? Based off of what they're writing. That's what they're thinking. If you say, well, I don't believe they were thinking that, show me something else that was written around that time that was saying we don't really believe this or whatever, or this is really what we believe, and then we'll have a discussion. But if you can't find any of that, you're just making up stuff. I'm trying to say this is what existed. They thought about stuff differently than we do. So therefore, we probably think about it differently than the New Testament writers, the apostles, did. And that is not a good thing for us to do. So anyway, I got a lot more written here, but I'm not going to go there. Oh, man, I just blew past this. So in Enoch 15:4, as you know, that which your watchers, the fathers of these spirits, did in my days, and also these spirits are alive. Shut them up and take them to place of judgment, and do not let them cause corruption among the sons of God. Oh my God, because they are cruel and were created to destroy. Now, Noah was the one that was complaining about all these demons, because think about it. The flood happened, kill all these hybrid, half human, half angel beings called Nephilims, which are giants. Killed them. Who knows how many there were? There were evil. They're evil spirits. By the way, they're also called bastard spirits because they don't really, they're referred to that way as well. They were unclean spirits. They were referred to all of that in the Second Temple period. So they're running around. There's so many of them. Noah prays and says, "Can you help me?" And God says yes. And Mastema says, "Hey, let me have a tenth of them," like I already said. And then we got. I mean, I guess we should be thankful that we don't have 90. The other 90% demons kicking around. If this is even true, I don't know. I don't know if this is true or not. I have no way of knowing. I can tell you this: you won't figure out what a demon is or where it comes from, other than it's a negative thing. And the writers didn't seem important to even tell you anything about these creepy little demons, because they already assumed the people who read it knew it. I'm just telling you, this is a demon. I already showed you that the name demon has many meanings. Most of them are negative, but they're not all negative, because the word in Greek, well, the word demon would maybe be negative, but the Greek word under it, daimonion, was translated into many things. So it had one word in English, like we get demons, but then it was divinities, and then it was gods, and it was other things. I mean, there was all these different things that they translated this, because remember, the reason why a demon could be known as a god is because a demon, a daimonion, is a spirit being, and the word God in Hebrew was, remember, Elohim. So therefore, that means spirit being. So this weird lesser spirit being thing, hybrid, whatever, this is a spiritual being. So therefore it can be referred to as an Elohim. A daimonion is an Elohim. Now, of course, there's no Elohim like the Elohim, which is Yahweh. Let me just say that just in case someone got offended. Anyway, moving on. True or false? According to the New Testament, an evil spirit simply refers to an unknown sickness that has since been identified by medical experiments. I assume everybody will get this one correct. All right. So the answer is false. Seems obvious. But let's talk about this for a second. Why is this here? Why am I talking about this? All right. So in the Second Temple Jewish mind, they saw a clear connection between illness and demonic activity. This consequently blurred the lines between healing and exorcism, and the overlap in discernibility in the Gospels. This link is also discernible in the ways Second Temple writers describe both possession and exorcism. Now, Mastema, mentioned in Jubilees chapter 10, we learned that, like I already mentioned earlier, 9/10 of the sinning watchers were imprisoned in the abyss for their crimes, but 1/10 were allowed. So Mastema was allowed to remain on earth under the control of Mastema, which we call Satan. Mastema, with 1/10 of the afflicted mankind by God's decree, he allows it. But he told an archangel to teach Noah about healing. So where do you get that? Well, these demons brought sickness, and so to counter that, God taught Noah how to deal with the sicknesses that these demons brought. These demons were left here to torture us when we are in disbelief. Now we know this because, well, when people start reaching out to the occult and start messing around with the demonic side, when one of those demons comes in, it is always torturous to them and everybody that knows them. So anyway, in Jubilees, the spirits of the Watcher's sons call sin, bloodshed, pollution, illness, famine. That's in Jubilee, by the way, Jubilee chapter 12. It is made explicit, however, that they do so as part of God's plan. So in the Second Temple view, God controls the demons. God controls everything. God decrees. They have a high view of God. It's not like these demons get to run around and God shows up every once in a while in front of them and says, get gone. That's not what he does. He actually has a plan, and he uses all things for his good. So, I mean, they have, but it's not, he doesn't, he makes provisions for people who are following him but he still orchestrates and lets them run around. You remember, Jesus didn't destroy the demons. He just told them to leave that body and go away. He didn't actually send those down because Jesus, of course, being God, they already decreed that a tenth would hang around until the end. So he didn't make them go. He didn't bind them. He let them go. He showed he had control over them, but he didn't actually bind them. He just sent them away. And guess what they could do? Go find another place. He sent them into pigs. When the pigs died, they were free again to float around until they went and found a new home. So Jesus could have stopped it. He could have bound them, but he didn't, because he had already decreed. Either him or the Father, I don't know, but God, the Godhead, had already decreed, no, they're going to run around and torture and people who are being bad. So anyway, during the lifetime of Noah, demons are diminished in the number, subordinated to Mastema to help him in his divinely appointed task as destroying and misleading the wicked. That's in Jubilees 10. So I would suggest that you spend a little time in Jubilee, because demons may cause suffering, but the reader is assured that their actions are part of the unerringly fair system of divine justice. That's mentioned in Jubilee 5. So I just think it's fun. Now, I just want to mention this, Azazel, because Azazel that's the next question too. So let's poll that. Who is Azazel? Have you ever heard of Azazel? By the way, this is a true picture of Azazel. He sent it to me. No, me and Azazel's not on first name basis. I told him I was coming after him, and he said, well, here's a picture of me. Come get me. And I said, I already have. Happened in Revelations 12. You like that? Sorry, I'm so stupid. All right. So 20% of the class said alternate translation for scapegoat. 40% said an evil being in First Enoch, and the rest said all the above. So the answer for Azazel is actually he's referenced to all of them, including X-Men. I can't believe I have no dorks that just chose X-Men. But I guess some of you had to. 40% of you just said, I have no idea if he's an X-Men guy. But I think the other ones might be right. So reason deduction. So Azazel, it occurs 4 times in the Old Testament, only in Leviticus 16. Some translations do refer to him as a scapegoat. Oh man, I should have chose different colors. I'm sorry. That white on that yellow doesn't show up very well. I apologize for that. But let's see here. Just give me 1 second, guys. Come on. maybe you can see that better. I'll do it again on the next slide. I apologize. So you can see, then Aaron shall cast lots for the two goats, one lot for Yahweh and one lot for Azazel. So in the Old Testament, just give me 1 second. I'm trying to do something for you. All right. So in here you see, I had this one in white too, so I was changing the color, so you could actually read it. So here, and he said, these are being prepared for the host of Azazel, the host of Azazel. I think it's funny, but in First Enoch 54, chapter 54, verse 5, it talks about the army of Azazel was bound for mating with women. Azazel is not who First Enoch states that was in the garden. Azazel and Gadriel are two different beings that did two different things. Gadriel misled Eve. Azazel talked the angels into procreating later in Genesis 6 with women. So our view and the Second Temple view is a little different on this. But we'll discuss, so Azazel, anyway, we'll discuss this in this question about Azazel, who was not in the garden. But let's see. I got a note here. It says the third, an evil angel was named Gadriel. This one is who showed the children of the people all the blows of death, who misled Eve, who showed the children of people how to make the instruments of death, such as the shields, breastplate, and the swords, warfare, instruments of death, and so forth, in chapter 69. I just think it's very interesting that the Jews in between the two periods, the Old Testament, New Testament, has so many different views than we do. Over the centuries, being disconnected from Jewish literature, and then us being Protestants being divorced from even more stuff because we threw out more of the books of the Bible, maybe rightly so, maybe not, but we didn't. But we lost so many different things over the years that just they would take. Oh man, where's the polling questions? I moved stuff around so I could actually. So let's answer this question. Jesus, because I'm way over, Jesus' connection with which of the figure helps explain the role of exorcism? This is going to be actually a very interesting question. It's actually going to be very interesting. Why is it interesting? Well, the reason why it's interesting is because in the Old Testament, the Messiah, in our Old Testament, the Messiah wasn't to be known as an exorcist. So it's just, it's pretty wild. Anyway, half the class said Moses, half the class said Daniel. So the answer is Solomon. Now, how did they get that? How did they do that? Now, despite the fact that there are no exorcisms in the Old Testament, nor any explicit statement that the Messiah would have power to cast out demons, Jews who witnessed and heard about Jesus' power over demons did not see it at odds with the elements of the Messiah profile. But you won't find that in the Old Testament. Give me 1 second. I gotta let my dog out. Come here, baby. All right. It was easy to know she wanted out. She was laying over there by my office door with her nose stuck under the door, trying to get out. So it was an easy hint. So anyway, now this is just a list of Solomon's exorcist sources. Okay, so notice is busy. Review back later when you have time. That's what this is. Just sources after sources after sources in Second Temple period that talks about Solomon and his abilities. Now, despite the fact, given the apparent silence of the Old Testament on such things, why did the exorcisms fit the messianic profile? Well, we can only review a portion of the primary source material relevant to answering this question, which is pretty dense, actually. The point is that the Second Temple, and the part that we're reviewing that I've decided to put on the screen for time, we're not even going to dive into any of those. I'm just putting them up there just so you can go look it up or whatever. The point is that in the Second Temple Jewish thinking, the decision of winds like the wind that blows outside versus spirits was not a firm intellectual divide. The two were associated, and so it was near impossible to argue that the author of the Wisdom of Solomon, which of course we don't have in our Bible, but the Orthodox and Catholics do, the Wisdom of Solomon would not have had spirits being in view. There's 418 quotes. Now, I said there's 418 quotes in the New Testament. 340 are found to be more closely to the Septuagint. 33 quotes are found more to the Masoretic text. And 45 quotes fit either one. So that's 81.5% quotes from the LXX. Why did I bring up the LXX or the Septuagint? Because Wisdom of Solomon is in the Septuagint. So the Septuagint, remember, is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. But we removed it. But yet 81.5% of the times, the New Testament authors quote from that version they don't quote from the Hebrew, they quote from the Greek Old Testament, Greek Old Testament, 81.5% of the time. So if you want to know where I get that source from, there's a really cool book by Archer, Gleason Archer. I think he was a biblical genius. Spoke like, I don't know, 8-9 different languages, biblical languages. And so anyway, it's called Old Testament Quotations in the New Testament, a complete survey. It's sort of geekish, but you may like it. In lines 9 through 10 assert that David wrote Psalms for the possessed. The Hebrew behind this translation, I'm not going to read that, reads, I have it reads in the qual passive participle of the lemma, which means assaulted. But see, a lot of things are lost in my notes. I try to skip through this stuff fluently, but I fumble like right now. Anyway, this terminology was used in the rabbinic community in Psalms 91. By the way, we don't have a Psalms 91. Yes, it's in the Septuagint. We took it out. Why? Yeah, there's a lot we took out. So in Psalms 91, it is a psalm used for exorcism, and it attaches it starts moving into the direction of the Messiah having the ability to cast out demons. You remove all this stuff, you don't find it in our Bible. You put this stuff back in, now you see why they don't explain this stuff in the Old Testament, because they're actually referred to these other things. But anyway, so Psalms 91 appears among the apocryphal Psalms in Cave 11, if you wanted to know, a collection of Psalms whose apparent purpose was for exorcising demons. So this is not an arbitrary judgment, for the rabbis considered Psalms 91 to be a song referring to evil spirits, or a song for demons. This should not be a surprise given our study of the terminology of the evil spirits or demons having, or demonion having so many different meanings. The evil spirits, pestilence, and destruction are prominent in this Psalms. Now let's do a brief comparison of New Testament texts. Okay. Mark 1, 21 through 28, and Mark 5, 1 through 20. Both of these texts are about demon possession. The second text, Mark 5, differs from Mark 1 in 4 respects that are important. Associated with death, has a name, and asked not to be sent out of the country, which has the reference that, if you ever read that, you'd be like, why do you ask not to be sent out of the country? That's because it's cosmic geography. That area was under the rule of a different sons of God, as mentioned in Deuteronomy 32:8. He didn't want to be sent out of that area. And the title of Jesus is different. In Mark 12, he's referred to as Jesus of Nazareth because he's in a God-controlled area, Israel. But in Mark 5, he's referred to as the Son of the Most High. Instead of the Nazareth, he's referred to as Jesus, the Son of the Most High, because he's in a different geographical area that's ran by different spiritual beings. So this is important when you go back to read Deuteronomy 32:8, 9. The Most High disinherited the nations and divided the nations according to the number of the sons of God. Now, by the way, you can always drop out anytime, and you can review this whenever you want. But I'm going to continue to go because, man, I hit the wrong button. Where did I go? Okay, where was I at? The exorcism of the legion. I'm sorry. Let me go one note about that. It is worth noting that Mark 5 is the first time Jesus did not limit his audience to Jews. And notice Jesus does not kill or destroy the demons. The exorcism of Legion is a theological message. Legion recognizes that Jesus is the rightful Lord of the country of Gerasenes, which is Old Bashan, now under Gentile, and at that time it was now under Gentile occupation. This is Tobias, the son of Tobit. Yes, Tobit's not in our Bible either, but it is in the Orthodox and it is in the Orthodox, and it is in the Catholic, and it is in some other traditions. So why am I bringing it up? Because you can't really understand a lot of things, and the change of demon from the Old Testament to the New Testament, how things are handled differently if you skip all the stuff in the middle. So anyway, this particular thing, it's important because it is the oldest Jewish text where a demon actually has a name, like in Mark 5. Also, it is referred by Christian pseudographical writings like Testament of Solomon, which dates to the 1st century AD. Why is that important? Only because it shows some of the thinking that was going on by other people. I'm not saying it's so. Anyway, it says this type of story simply shows how they were thinking at the time, not an argument for inspiration. According to the Testament of Solomon, a young boy working on the temple is plagued by a demon sucking out his life force through his right thumb. Yeah, I know, through his right thumb. Sorry. Solomon prays about this problem and is given a magical ring by the angel Michael. This object is sometimes referred to as the Seal of Solomon, and it was supposedly shaped like a pentagram or a hexagram like the Star of David. Using the ring, Solomon enslaves the demon and forces them to work and build the temple. Solomon is also, I mean, a lot of that's probably made up, but it's saying there was a thought that, you know, and because of other things we didn't review because for time, there was Solomon had wisdom and believed that he had wisdom and making potions and whatever, and he could actually control demons. At least that's what the thought was through Second Temple period time, and that's why Jesus is related to Solomon in that way and not the others. So anyway, it relates to the four different differences previously mentioned. Before the comparison that we have here with Tobit, let's just take 1 second. Tobit, it is for Protestants apocryphal book, meaning it is one of the extra writings we do not include, but it is in the Septuagint again, and but anyway, it is by scholars classified as a diaspora novel. Diaspora it just simply means it is set. The meaning is it's set in a diaspora where the Jews live in another. The diaspora means the Jews live in another land away from home. So that means they're scattered. So it's a very popular book in the Second Temple period in early Christianity. Tobit is very popular. Tobit itself was written around the 2nd or 3rd century BC. Fragments from 4 Aramaic and 1 Hebrew manuscript of Tobit are found among Dead Sea Scrolls. The Essene Qumran Jews really liked it, based off of how they treated it and commented on it. So threaded throughout these texts are the references to well-known Tobiads and a wealthy family. Now, let's see. Here you can see the blue represents the deuterocanonical, green is protocanonical. I just wanted to let you see here quickly that how other traditions actually use and look at this book. So here, Tobit 3, 7 through 7, chapter 3, chapter 6, and chapter 8. So what is the story that matters to us in Tobit? It is about Tobit's son, Tobias, the son of Tobit. He travels with Raphael. By the way, that was a get you on the other one where it says, is Raphael one of the angels of the name of the angels? Well, it comes out of the book of Tobit. So not out of the other Protestant canon books. Tobias takes a wife. The problem is Sarah, that's his wife's name, had tried to marry 7 times. She married 7 of Tobias's brothers, and each time, before they were able to consummate, Asmodeus, demon of wrath, killed the groom. So Sarah was completely under the demon's charge. Any man that tried to consummate with her was instantly killed by Asmodeus. So Tobias was scared. Raphael came to him and said, hey, don't worry about it. I got a solution. And this solution you don't want to miss, just in case Asmodeus shows up. He said, I need you to burn the heart and liver of a fish in the room, and it will make the demon run away. So for any of you future brides out there that may ever be listening to this, I hope Asmodeus never shows up and your groom has to burn fish hearts and fish livers in the room, because it may mess with the romantic moments. Just saying. Doesn't seem very romantic. But dying from Asmodeus didn't seem romantic either, so I guess she was willing to do anything. Apparently. That had to smell bad. Anyway, Raphael followed the fleeing demon to upper part of Egypt, and he bound him there. So, like in Mark, the demon kills, has a name, and then deals with, and it has to do with cosmic geography as well, because instead of hanging around in Israel, the demon, because they, by the way, remember it's remember that the Jews were scattered, so they weren't in Israel, just in the Tobit. So this demon just went to another area which was controlled by another bad guy, another bad spiritual being who wasn't doing what he should be doing. And we know that in Psalm 6, by the way. Psalms 106 is where God says how he's going to deal with those guys for not ruling properly. And he said, you know, your sons of God, but you're going to die like men because of your treatment or mistreatment, actually. So anyway, so let's talk about a couple of Old Testament texts. We'll see that these demons are not quite the same as Tobit and Mark. So in Ephesians 6:12, we're told by Paul to not concentrate on the physical world. It is a mere symptom of the problem. The physical world is. Instead, our primary focus should be spiritual world. If you notice, the New Testament authors never describe what a demon really is or where they come from. They assume the contemporary audience already knows this information, like I had already said. Where do we find this information? Well, the Old Testament demons, New Testament demons are not the same thing. Just like angels, in the Old Testament, angels are strictly messengers, not spiritual beings. So, Cain's father. All right, who was Cain's father? This is a fun question. Why? I mean, the answer is not a trick question. The answer is obvious. The answer is exactly what you think. I know that the answer never seems like what you think, but there's a reason. I didn't choose these questions. This was but I wanted to cover all the questions that had been chosen by someone previous to me, and I'm just simply elaborating on where they get the answer from. So anyway, 100% of the class said Adam. So the answer is Adam. Anyway, why is this in here? There was a myth during the Second Temple period, the myth that Cain was literally the spawn of Satan. It actually is a very prevalent among the anti-Semitic groups. So the idea is extrapolated from several biblical passages, despite this anti-Semitic connotation. So if you ever hear that Cain is the son of Satan, and then what they'll do is it's a way of trying to split apart and start saying some people are on this earth are not as valuable as others, and including this is also, like I said, is used as anti-Semitic. So anyway, the biblical passage reference to support this myth are as follows. Now, by the way, this is Genesis 4:1. Now Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. Genesis 4:25. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son called Seth. And God has appointed me to another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. Okay, so it seems pretty self-explanatory how to get it out of that. So for this is the message that proponents of the serpent seed mythology ignore these parts of both verses and focus on the phrase on 4:1, where Eve says, I have acquired a man at Yahweh. The Hebrew lemma at et is most frequently an untranslated participle that marks the direct object of the verb. So why is that important? Sorry for the grammar spasm there, but why is this important? On this little weird view, it may also be a homograph, that is a preposition denoting the assistance or participation of the following noun, with, together. So what is that? How does that work? Proponents of the seed myth support their belief through an Aramaic targum, which is not a translation. Aramaic targum is not a translation, it's a paraphrase. Oh, sorry. Someone wants back in. So the Aramaic targum is not it's a paraphrase of the Hebrew. It is not a translation. Anyway, it allegedly puts forth the idea that Eve and Satan copulated in producing the Targum. In view is known as Targum Pseudo Jonathan, produced in the 7th to 8th century AD. But I got more here, but So the Targum, composed well over 1,000 years after the final form of the Hebrew Bible, renders Genesis 4:1 this way. Adam knew his wife, Eve, who had conceived from Samuel and the angel of the Lord. Samuel is the name of Satan's evidence. Samuel is a name for Satan, evidenced in the second temple period. So that's another name for Satan. Remember, there's more than one Satan in the Old Testament. So the Targum is an Aramaic translation of the Hebrew book of Genesis. It has, despite the other lack of exegetical data, we must ask where 1 John 3:11 and 12 nevertheless supports the idea. So they're saying that you read these verses, you look at the Aramaic Targum, and then you go to John chapter 1, 1 John chapter 3, it supports the idea that Cain's dad is Satan. So since the entire Epistle of John deals with the theme of brotherly love, the figure of Cain, the murderer, provides the perfect antithesis to Christ, the one who laid down his life for others. The author exhorts the believers not to be like Cain, who was of the devil, of the evil one, and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteousness. The question of Cain's origins arises from this phrase, who was of the evil one. And I have the Greek words here, but which may be considered a reference to his satanic descent. So, and then people try to, so obviously they're reaching, and obviously they're using a very relatively new pseudographical work. But the purpose of this is, if you ever hear that Cain is the son of Satan, or you ever see that, understand that it's just there to be anti-Semitic. I have a lot more to write, on this, but I just wanted to let you know that there's a view out there. You may or may not heard it. Now, this is our final question. So this is important. Can a Christian be possessed by demons? I'll give it just a couple more seconds. Looks like the class is split. Half the class is saying no, and the other says it's complicated. So let's take a peek at this and see. So the answer is no, but it's complicated, and you'll see why. It has to do with the meaning of the words. Okay, so bear with me. I'll be done here. I'm almost done. I don't have multiple slides. This is on the slide. This is the last slide that I'll be talking about. So it's not if we correctly define possession as ownership, then no. Those who are in Christ, members of his body, cannot be owned by the Lord of darkness. Okay. But the New Testament scholars who focus on this sort of material and this question also point out that the Greek term possessed by a demon, daimonizome, I can't even say it, daimonizome. I am not a Greek speaker. Doesn't denote ownership. So when you see where it says demon possessed or possessed by a demon, it doesn't denote ownership. And okay, it's better to think demonized, because nowhere where it says these people had demons, where it talked about demon possessed, is in reference to those demons. Those who had demons. Now, let me just say this. Sorry, I'm trying to skip through some notes. I have too much here. This is something that can happen to believers, demonized. Okay, which is why the New Testament warns Christians about certain things, ways demonization can be in the picture. For example, we ought to evaluate theological teachings, because some ideas can have demons and evil spirits as their source. First Timothy 4:11, Paul mentions components of his that he apparently thought were influenced by evil spirits. Second Timothy 2, and 2 Timothy 2:26, Christians are told in Scripture to give no place to the devil. Ephesians 4:27, and to avoid temptation that enslaves us. Since habitual sin and temptation are linked to the devil, as in First John 3, James chapter 1, Romans chapter 7, 1 Thessalonians 3, struggling with certain sins could be construed as demonization. The overarching point is that demonization can take various forms. Now, again, the word possession never even appears in the Bible in the passages where Jesus or the apostles cast evil spirits out of an individual. The expression demon possessed or demon possession does occur in some English translations in the Greek, but there is never a Greek word for possession that stands by itself. So you have demon, the Greek word demon, and then you have a daimonion, and then you have a Greek word that's translated as demon possession, but that's not like demon possession. That is a total different Greek word. So why is it? Because there are Greek words for possession. There's huparko, echo, kateko, kateomio, paropoiel. These are all different words. When you look at the word in English word that's been translated as possession of this, possession of that, there's multiple different Greek words that's been translated as possession, but none of those are present next to the word demon. So when you see demon possession, it's actually in the Greek, it's actually just one word. It's not two. It's not like demon and then one of those other Greek words, possession. It's actually an assumption. So if ownership is not a workable understanding of the Greek lemma, daimonizome, which is that word that I just said, daimonizome, how should it be translated and understood? Some translators have detected the problem caused by English semantics related to the word possesses. So while these choices may help by saying demon possession, it also creates confusion. There are other Greek lemmas that could be used to clarify, but none of them were used to clarify the word possession. None of them. So the best alternative seems to be simply translated we'll try it again, daimonizome, as demonized. This choice avoids misconceptions like being owned by a demon when you're a Christian. You can't be owned by a demon because you're owned by Christ, but you can be demonized, tortured, tormented by a demon, especially if you put yourself in those positions. So that's really a better translation for that word, considering all the Greek words possession are missing from the Greek text next to that word daimonizome. So what is the cost to a believer for not understanding the spiritual powers that oppose us? Well, you may end up fighting an enemy in the weakest possible position. If you want to know your enemy, if you want to beat your enemy, know your enemy. And if you don't, it's like any other thing. If you don't know much about an enemy, how can you defeat him? And if you do defeat him, it may come at a high cost that you didn't have to if you would have done better planning or understood him. And that's what I've been trying to do through this study. So of this relates to the previous questions. We need to realize that there are supernatural powers that want to lead us astray, in that we believe that uh, that they want to misdirect our loyalties to Jesus, and that want us mired in sin that lead us to self-destruction and harm. We sort of know that already, at least we ought to, by sitting under preaching that's worth our time. But like Heiser is looking into this book, Demons, it's to get details of why. We can only understand that, and that knowledge will help us think more clearly about who we are and what our mission is. If we grasp and embrace the supernatural worldview of the biblical writers, we'll be more apt to win with less casualties. So anyway, that is today's lesson in 2 hours or less. I tried to do it. I spoke a lot. I spoke continuously. But if we were in our normal class, this would have took me another 6 months. You know, let's see. I want to stop sharing. That's what I want to do. And I want to say, guys, I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you understand that everything isn't as easy and clear as our modern Christian beliefs think they are. A lot of the ways that we think are strictly from tradition, and they can't be found in Scripture. And just remember, if you ever read something in the New Testament and you're doing reference to the Old Testament and they don't sound anything alike, and you're thinking, I don't even see how someone even references that Old Testament thing, more than likely they're referencing something that a Second Temple writer would have referenced. And they're just jumping straight to the reference that the Second Temple writer would have referenced. The Second Temple writer would make more sense to the New Testament quote. I know, sounds like heresy, because I'm always quoting stuff outside the Bible. I mean, I don't know what else to do other than say, hey, these guys are here and there and everywhere. Anyway, next week, what we're going to do is we're going to, the next couple of weeks, I'm just going to do a quick review. I got some questions. Here's a question. Here's an answer. Here's a question. Here's an answer. Maybe a little boring. Join if you want. Review it if you want. This is recorded. I'll have it loaded to the YouTube site for you guys to go back and look at. And so anyway, I hope that today, I know today was a long lesson, but I'm really trying to stop this lesson. I mean, I put the next 2 weeks were already 2 weeks over that I didn't plan on doing, that I thought would be helpful because I've covered so much that I thought it would actually be helpful. But I was actually going to make this my final week, but it's not, because I really want you guys to try to understand it best I can. But I love you guys, and I hope that this, if nothing else, has made you less scared of books, other books that are outside the Bible. I'm not telling you that they're inspired by God. That isn't the point. They were definitely known by the Christian writers, and they were used by the Christian writers, and they influenced the Christian writers. So if you want a bigger worldview of the Christian writers, you can't do it without including Second Temple writings. It's just not possible. You won't even, things will be too confusing. You won't even know how you got to where you got, or how they got to where they got. How did they come up with that? You won't be able to get it. So anyway, if there's no questions, I'm out. Have a good day, guys. Been a long class today. Peace out.